Erin and I met over a shared enthusiasm for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Erin has a wide-ranging interest in popular culture, including a passion for E. Phillips Oppenheimer, an interest in the American corpus of spoken and written language, and her own website, www.dressaday.com, which addresses the importance of 1950s novelty fabrics and circle skirts. Erin's interests are quirky and wide-ranging, and her scholarship is thorough. I think you'll enjoy hearing from her. Ladies and gentlemen, Erin McKean.
Wow, Betsy's now my official PR person. I am really, really, really happy to be here because I feel about Google the way most people feel about rock stars. I am this close to writing Google fanfic. So when I was talking to Pamela about what I could possibly talk about today, I gave her a list, and she said, talk about everything. So that's what I'm going to try and do. I'm not going to talk about everything in alphabetical order, which is what I prefer. But before I get started, I was at a design conference in Pasadena a couple days ago for the Art Center College of Design. It was overwhelming, it was really exciting, and I got to meet a lot of designers and very creative people. And one of them was someone who worked at Applied Minds, and she said that before I get started ever talking to anybody, I should always tell them what my favorite word is. And when somebody who works with Danny Hillis from Applied Minds tells you to do something, you do it. And so my favorite word, I'm a little embarrassed to admit it because it's a little egotistical, because my first name is Erin, and my favorite word also starts with those 4 letters. It's erinaceous, which means of, like, or pertaining to hedgehogs. And once you know about that word's existence, you just look for reasons to use it. Like, I really wanted to be nice to him, but he was so erinaceous. Very prickly. I like to use it about prickly people. I like to use it about people who like to go through underpasses under streets in Britain, which is also things that hedgehogs do. But the first thing I wanted to talk about today is 10 things that I wish everybody knew about dictionaries. This is a very selfish topic to speak on because every group that I, quote-unquote, educate makes my life easier. But the first thing that I wish everybody knew about dictionaries is that there is, in fact, not one book called The Dictionary. You will never find a book on a bookshelf where the spine says The Dictionary. People often believe there's this kind of Platonic ideal of the dictionary that is actually instantiated, that all lexicographers in the world work on the same tome, and that there's this kind of one size fits all. Every word that's ever been in any dictionary is in the dictionary somewhere. They never have actually managed to point me towards this, the physical location of the dictionary. But one size does not fit all with dictionaries because a dictionary is a tool. How many people here have more than one screwdriver? Right? Everybody's got more than one screwdriver because it's a tool. You need Phillips head, you need flathead, you need those really cool ones that help you fix your computer. You have plenty of them because you want one for every job. And a dictionary is also a tool, and you want one for every job. How many people here have more than one dictionary? Hey, oh my God, you are my people. So you guys already know this. I could just cross this one off the list. But you'd be surprised how many people write to me and say, I needed to use this word and it wasn't in my dictionary. And this is often by email, so I email them back and I say, what dictionary was it? And they say, oh, well, it's my breast pocket dictionary. And I'm like, well, when was it published? And they say 1978. And often the word they're trying to find is internet. And so I was like, okay, you have just tried to drive in a nail with a screwdriver. You used the wrong tool for the job. So people often come up to me and say, what dictionary should I use? And they often expect me to say, well, everyone should use the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. That's the wrong tool for a whole bunch of jobs. For one thing, they started revising it in M. So anything prior to M has been fairly spottily revised since 1989, and in some cases since 1936, and in some cases since the 1800s. So there are a lot of gaps there. It's a very specialized tool, but it's not the right tool for everybody. And then some people then expect me to say, in a very kind of boosterish marketing way, you should use the Oxford American Dictionary. Of course that's the best dictionary for all circumstances, all purposes. But I really feel that people should use the dictionary that fits well with them. Find the one that you like. Find the one that feels good to use. Because a tool that you don't use might as well be a paperweight. And I know a lot of people use their dictionaries as doorstops or to press flowers or to prop up toddlers on chairs at dinner time. And these are all good and reasonable uses for a dictionary. But it's not the intended use. It's all off-label use of a dictionary. So find a dictionary that fits with you. Look up one of your favorite words and read the definitions. See how it feels to you. Look up a word you know a lot about. Does the dictionary kind of jibe with your way of thinking? You want a dictionary that fits with your mindset. Look up a word that you don't know anything about, especially that you don't know how to pronounce. Cover up the head word and read the pronunciation and see, can you guess how to pronounce it from the pronunciation? If you don't understand the pronunciation key, it's a tool that's going to fail you. So find the one that fits for you. Nobody drives a car, nobody buys a car without test driving it first. Test drive a couple dictionaries, because hearing from me that the new Oxford American Dictionary is the best dictionary for you is ridiculous unless you test drive it first. Now, if you do test drive it and you love it, I will be really, really, really happy. But if you buy it on my say-so and you hate it and you never touch it, that's worse than never buying it at all, in my opinion. The next thing, once you drive that dictionary off the lot, the next thing I wish people knew about dictionaries is you have to read the manual. People don't believe or understand or think the dictionaries come with a manual, but everyone does, and it's called the front matter. And it is a universally held and absolutely true belief that nobody reads the front matter. I could put obscenities in the front matter in 18-point type. It would be 15 years before somebody wrote me a letter. I've been sorely tempted. I know all of you are going to go flip through it now, like, did she? But people don't read the front matter because everybody believes, I know how to use the dictionary. I don't know, maybe you have the same problem with tools that you build, that nobody ever reads the user manual, nobody reads the user guide. And it's true, people, if something is if something's just barely above the baseline of well-designed, people think, I know how to use that. And then when things go wrong, they don't blame themselves for not reading the user guide. Luckily, dictionaries hardly ever burst into flame. So the downside to not reading the user guide is lower than for, say, some pieces of electronic equipment. But there's a lot of complicated stuff going on in the dictionary. There's a lot of information that is being compressed. It's so compressed. Someday I worry that the dictionary will actually reach critical mass and will implode, that the data will be so tight and put in such a small space that we'll have a black hole. Luckily, all the printing is done very far away from where I live. So if it does black hole, I won't be within the event horizon. So there's a lot of stuff in the dictionary that is not really as transparent as it looks. For instance, some of the other dictionaries, not the Oxford American, they arrange their definitions by the oldest first. 8 people out of 10 believe that the most important definition is first. So if you look up the word mystery in this dictionary, the first definition is not, a puzzle. The first definition is the sorrowful mystery of the rosary. And that freaks people out. Are people really talking about the rosary that much for it to be the most common definition? No. And if they'd read the front matter, they would understand. The front matter tells you what we believe the purpose of the dictionary is. It tells you what assumptions we've made. It tells you the method that we've used to put entries together. It tells you our intent. For instance, when we label certain things as dialect or humorous or poetic, we explain what all that means. So I still believe nobody's going to read the front matter, but if you have 10 spare minutes, just flip through it. We've included really good essays in the Oxford American Dictionary front matter. There's one by an etymologist. There's one by a phonologist that explains how American voices are. The etymologist explains what we can and can't know about the history of words. Nobody ever touches those, which is very sad-making. The next thing I wish people knew about the dictionary is that inclusion in the dictionary is not the Legion of Word honor. I am not the curator of the Word Museum. I am not, the dictionary is not the Word Social Register. I don't give out word vouchers for Almacs for the dictionary. Words are not Pinocchio. They are not trying to be a real boy. The reason that a word is in the dictionary is because it's a good tool for reading and writing. It's useful. We have evidence that it exists. I mean, well, except for the ones we put in as copyright traps. But the idea of being in the dictionary is not something that words aspire to. What we're trying to do is make a collection of words that we think readers and writers and speakers need to know about. We're making a toolbox. And if you have a toolbox full of really beautiful handmade tiny left-handed monkey wrenches, that's not a useful toolbox. So a lot of people will lobby for words that are just beautiful, that are just gorgeous. There's a professor in Michigan who wants the word presticogitation to be in the dictionary. And presticogitation is fancy, fast sleight of thought, that you're thinking so fast that you've confused everybody in the room, like you're a magician. It's a great word. It is useful to I don't know who. So until a lot of people show us that they're taking it up and that they're using it, it's not going to make it in the dictionary. And a lot of people feel like if a word's not in the dictionary, is it really a word at all? And I always say, think about dogs. You can have the best pet ever. He can fetch your slippers. He can lie at the foot of your bed at night. He can, play with your children and be like world champion Frisbee dog. Would you say that dog wasn't a dog if it wasn't pedigreed? If it wasn't registered by the AKC, does that make it less of a dog? No, a dog is as a dog acts, and a word is as a word acts. And being in the dictionary is an accidental thing. It's so very close to random. It's just, we found it. First, lexicographers have to find the word. Then we have to figure out how people use the word, and then we have to see if it fits. So there's a whole rigmarole that words have to go in to be in the dictionary, and there are lots and lots of very useful, real words that just haven't made it in yet. And so don't use the dictionary as a rule of thumb as to whether or not you should use a word. As to how you should spell it, yes. As to whether or not you should use it, no. Because if you love a word and you use it and you get other people to use it, then eventually it will go in the dictionary and you can affect that. So just because something happens to be included in its correct alphabetical order in a 2,000-page book, it's not a significant achievement for that particular word. And on the fourth thing I wish people knew about dictionaries is that lexicographers don't love all the words that we put in. And we put in a lot of words that are quite frankly horrible. Sometimes they sound terrible, like phlegm. Sometimes they're words that just grate on the nerves of people who have a kind of highly developed language aesthetic sense, like irregardless. But we put them in because people use them, and there's important information that you have to know about these words. And people say, well, why can't you leave these horrible words out? Just ignore them. But ignoring bad things and hoping they go away is a strategy of failure. Our theory, our philosophy is it is worse to ignore than it is to warn. And kind of a great example of this is the words flammable and inflammable. So a while back, they realized that when they labeled things inflammable, people tended to throw lit cigarette butts in them. With, the consequences that comes from that. And so I'm sure, I know that there are people who were just really upset at the change from inflammable to flammable. But is it really better to hold on to that, language distinction? Or should you let people immolate themselves? So when we find words that we feel are problematic in this way, they offend large groups of people when they are used, they offend usage mavens, they offend 8th grade English teachers, we make notes and we say, because this is important information about the word, it's just as important as the pronunciation, it's just as important as the spelling, it's just as important as the meaning and the etymology and the example sentences. Unfortunately, we can't print them in quite as big as type as we like or quite as direct as we like. The note for inflammable does not say, don't throw cigarettes in this idiot. It's not quite that blunt. But we do warn. And we do that through usage notes and we do that through labels because it's better to share information than to just put it aside and hope it goes away. Another thing, the fifth thing I wish people knew about dictionaries, specifically dictionary entries, is you should treat every dictionary entry like it's the movie The Usual Suspects. You got to stay all the way to the end to figure out what's going to happen. A lot of people don't like to use a dictionary, so they look at an entry, and the first thing that's even on the same continent as the meaning they're trying to find, they grab, they slam the book shut, and they run away. And a lot of times, the meaning that they're really looking for, the understanding that they're really seeking, is 3 or 4 lines down the page. And most dictionary entries are pretty short. Of course, set runs to several columns, but you really don't have to fight your way through all that much. Reading even the biggest dictionary entry should take you less than half an hour. And everybody in this room, I feel confident making that projection. Now, I talked to you before about the dictionary that's arranged in historical order, and some dictionaries are arranged in rough frequency. New Oxford American Dictionary has an arrangement that is unlike any other American dictionary, and what we call it core sense subsense. So what this means is that we are looking for what the most psychologically salient meaning of a word is. It may not be the most frequent, it may not be the oldest, but this is kind of what is in your direct field of vision when you're thinking about the word. And then from that core sense, we show the subsenses that are kind of in your peripheral vision. And the way to think about this is we'll go back to dogs. Everybody in the room think of a dog. Did anybody think of a St. Bernard? Did anybody think of a teacup Chihuahua? No, you thought of kind of a canonical dog. That doesn't mean St. Bernards and teacup Chihuahuas are less doggy. It just means they're further off the dog continuum than whatever dog you thought about. Probably Labrador, Golden Retriever, medium-sized dog, Jack Russell Terrier. You thought of a very doggy dog. So with the core sense, you're thinking about the core of the word, and the subsenses are related. They're metaphorical extensions. They're newer senses of something that's a core sense. When you're thinking about a clock, a lot of people think of an analog clock, but we also have the digital clock sense connected to that. Now, if it were by historical order, analog clock would be way up towards the top, digital clock would be way towards the bottom. How is that helpful? You want to group like with like. So one of the examples I use for this is the word belt. The core sense is the thing that holds up your pants. But then you have subsenses that are things like a fan belt, and a black belt in karate, and to hit somebody with a belt. So those are all subsenses related to the core sense of the word belt. And sometimes we get into trouble like how we divide up the core senses. For instance, asteroid belt is a separate core sense of belt because, quite frankly, there are no pants in space. So we had to separate that out a little bit. So that's how we arrange the entries. And when you're looking at a core sense, subsense entry, you can play hot and cold. You look at the core sense and you're like, is this close to what I want to know? And if it isn't, skip all the core senses because we've already arranged them semantically for you. Then you can go on to the next core sense. But I really advise you to read to the end because especially if it's a word that was unusual enough to drive you to the dictionary, it's much more likely to have a twist at the end than you expect. Another thing I wish people knew about dictionaries that is hopeless. Nobody's ever going to do this. But you know how the fire department every year when you put your clocks back tells you to replace the batteries in your smoke detector? I kind of wish that there was a day like that every year for dictionaries, where I was, how old is your dictionary? Is it time to replace your dictionary? Of course, we couldn't have the great graphics of cute kids in their pajamas outside on the street while their house is burning down to motivate people to change their batteries. But I do wish that people knew that dictionaries have an expiration date. Now, obviously, an online dictionary like the OED, and I totally recommend the online OED over the print OED. The print OED is snazzy and is a much better indicator of class and status. But it's huge, and it hasn't been updated since 1989. An online dictionary, you can do all sorts of cool searches. Like, you can look for every word that the first cited author is Samuel Taylor Coleridge that came from Greek that has a Q in it, and see if that gets you any hits. You can search it 9 ways from Sunday, and it's updated quarterly. So maybe we should start selling lapel pins that say, I have access to the online OED, so that people who want to buy one to decorate their house, that kind of thing, would also have that satisfied. But print dictionaries have an expiration date, and there are all sorts of things that change that you don't notice that they change. A lot of retronyms, which is the digital analog clock, an electric guitar, an acoustic guitar. When we invent new things, they may not get new names, but we have to differentiate them in some way from how they are different from what went before. Now, the dictionary expiration date is not like milk. You don't have 2 years. Depending on, probably a good example is that If you got one for your high school graduation or when you went to college and you go to a reunion and everybody's bald, it's time for a new dictionary. But you don't have to throw away the old one. A lot of people say, oh, if I get a new dictionary, I'll have to throw away the old one where I made all these notes. And I'm like, how small of a house do you live in? One does not replace the other. You get to keep it. But I wish that people would update their dictionaries more, not from a purely selfish reason that I'd like to sell more dictionaries, but because it's a better tool. I have a cordless drill. I also have a drill with a really, really long cord on it. I keep them both. But when I got that cordless drill, that was a much better tool. It was really, really an improvement. And I think people will sometimes have that same experience, especially, if they quite possibly happen to be going from another company's dictionary to mine. But the next thing, the seventh thing that I wish people understood about dictionary, I call this the facts are good thing that people should know about dictionaries. Dictionaries should be based on observation. There's a long tradition in dictionary making of introspection. And the ideal is that a lexicographer can just sit there in a tastefully appointed room and kind of inspect the library of their own mind and say, this is how this word is used. This is how this word means. That is bunk. I spend more time thinking about words, even more than I spend thinking about dresses, which is an awful lot of time. I spend so much time thinking about words, and the more time I spend thinking about words, the less I know that I know. I have this theory that omniscience is tied to physical mobility. So, you have the more mobile you are, the less omniscient you are, and the more omniscient you are, the more likely you are to be a head in a jar. And I am so far away from head in a jar. I don't know everything, not even with Google. And so me basing the dictionary on what I know from my own thinking and from trying to puzzle out what people do is stupid. You don't want a faith-based dictionary. You want a dictionary to be evidence-based, like evidence-based medicine. We look and we see, how do people really use this word? And how we're doing that is we're building a corpus, which is a big, big database of running text. And I often get people say, well, why are you doing that? Why don't you just use Google? Because we're trying to build a corpus of about 1 billion words. And people say, even if you take all the porn out of Google, you're still going to have more than 1 billion words. But we're also looking for balanced text. And web pages tend to be made by people who really like the internet, and it's not really indicative of all the different speakers of English. So I'm looking for journal articles, magazine articles, newspapers, fanfic, that I find a lot of online. I'm looking for, we have a database of direct mail solicitation letters, because that's a real use of English. I'm looking for text of comic books, novels, nonfiction, anything that's printed, anything that's online, all sorts of stuff, because I'm trying to get a good cross-section picture. It's like an ice core, basically. I'm drilling down through English to figure out what all the different layers are, like rings on a tree. And by looking at that, we get a fairly decent picture of what English is. And it's still not as balanced as we'd like because we don't have as much spoken language. And that's really hard. People don't like it when you follow them around with a tape recorder. But we're working hard on it, and that's what we're using as our evidence. And of course, we still have citation cards. Dictionaries used to be almost completely based on citation cards. And the difference between a citation card, where when somebody finds a word in an interesting use, they type it up on a 3x5 card with the head word and the sentence, and then they send it to us. I always explain it as people used to study butterflies this way. They'd go somewhere exotic, they'd find a butterfly, they'd kill it, they'd pin it to a card, they'd send it back to the museum, and somebody at the museum would study it there. And contrast that with studying the butterfly out in the field. There's so much more information to be gathered from seeing the butterfly in its natural habitat than finding the one that stinks of formaldehyde on the card. And so the usages that trigger people to send in citation cards, those are still valuable to us, but we don't get the full picture until we go out and find that same butterfly in running text, until we find it in context. And that's really what the corpus is about, is sending us off to the word Amazon to investigate the word butterflies. I wanted to give people an idea of what 1 billion words mean. So I've invented a new unit of measurement, and I call it the Ulysses. So Ulysses has about 260,000 words. So if you think of a billion-word corpus, and please correct me if my math is wrong, that's like 384 Ulysses. So that's nothing, right? If you think of that, we could be building more and more and more than that, but just put it in that context. A billion words sound like a lot, but I'd like to get even more. The eighth thing that I wish people knew about dictionaries is that they're like icebergs. 90% of a dictionary is below the surface. The 10% that shows up in print is for every character that shows up in print, there are 8 or 9 characters of tagging. The XML tags that let us sort the dictionary, the ontology, the taxonomy. And so people think, well, you've just done 2,000 pages. That's not very much text. But all the tagging that supports this and the tagging that we keep augmenting, a dictionary can never be tagged enough. I don't think I'm going to be happy until there are 12 characters for each character that prints, till there's 24 characters for each character that prints, because there's a lot of information that can't really be disseminated in that linear way that the dictionary uses that we need to know. When we're doing semantic sets, when we're doing that kind of tagging, it would be nice if you could hit a button on your dictionary and it switched itself into a thesaurus. We can't do that yet, but maybe someday we can, and I'm kind of tagging for the future. I'm trying to lay a foundation in the data that when the physical format of the dictionary reaches the singularity, that point where I can't predict what a dictionary is going to look like anymore, I can at least hope that I will have done enough groundwork so that some poor lexicographer in 2030 doesn't have to go back and re-tag everything. The ninth thing that I wish everybody knew about dictionaries is only kind of tangentially arranged about dictionaries, and I would like to call this beware the good etymology. The better the story is behind a particular word's origin, the more likely it is to be completely made up, because most etymologies are boring. They say Latin. That's what we know. The better the story, the less likely it is to be true. Think about how many people are in your extended family. How many of them are eccentrics, right? It's not everybody. Not everybody can come from a family that everybody's weird. There's got to be at least one mundane person, right? Extrapolate that to etymologies, and there's a long tradition of folk etymology. I'm particularly fond of the group that we call CANOE, which is the Committee to Assign Nautical Origins to Everything. Find a word you don't know, it's from boats. They'll invent nautical technology just to give a word a nautical origin. I'd love to go to one of their meetings one day, but or everything's got to be an acronym. I'm sorry, POSH is not an acronym. The F word is not an acronym. We call them backronyms. People see a word and are like, how can I torture a sentence to make it even be vaguely the origin of this particular word? We don't even see backronyms start until the 50s. So any word that comes from Anglo-Saxon, they were not wandering around fighting the Normans, trying to come up with acronyms. It just didn't happen. And the last thing I wish that people knew about dictionaries is the right way and the wrong way to create a word. It's much, much easier to tell you what the wrong way is. The wrong way to get a word in the dictionary is to send me lots of email about it. It's even wronger if you'd like to copy the president of Oxford. It's almost the perfect storm of wrong if you say, I understand you pay $1,000 per definition. So this is absolutely true. This happens quite a bit. We don't pay $1,000. That's not the part that's true. The part that's true is people think that this is the right way to go about it. The right way is to find a real need, find a lexical gap, find some word that doesn't exist, some kind of traditional examples of lexical gap. Is we have a word for people that have lost their parents, they're orphans, but we don't have a word for parents who have suffered the unbelievable trauma of losing a child. I don't know why this is in English. We don't have the parallel word to orphan. Now, is this perhaps we just don't talk about it as much? Who knows why there's lexical gaps in English? But you want to find a gap and you fill it, or a really interesting new kind of metaphorical way to talk about something. New metaphor is like the, those faults on the bottom of the ocean that keep bubbling up forever, and they spit chemicals into the water, and others like teeming with life. Metaphor is that for the English language. When you think about it in a bleak way, if you're saying this is actually this, that creates new words. Don't be too funny. Funny words hardly ever really make it. And you're much more likely to be successful with something that's funny peculiar than funny haha. Even if you think about the funniest new coinage of like the last 50 years, that word is couch potato. Nobody laughs out loud at couch potato, really. It was kind of a cute joke. Maybe there's an analogy with boob tuber. If you think a tuber is a potato. Any joke you have to explain at that length. Yeah. So the less funny you are, the more successful you'll be. So what you want to do is if you've created a word and you think it meets all these qualifications, it's not funny, it's pretty useful, send it to all your journalist friends and see if they bite. Because getting a lexicographer to notice it is by getting it into print. And if you are going to email me about it, send me 15 citations that aren't all under your byline. That show me that real people are using it out in the real world. And then you wait a long time. Because quite frankly, we're backlogged. And also, I want to see if it's got staying power. I want to see if it's going to hang around for a while. I'm not going to put in an alternate spelling of hot with multiple T's, even though I have plenty of evidence for it, because I don't think it's going to be around in a year or so. Even though when I was downstairs looking at where all the Google searches were, Paris Hilton came up 10 times in 4 minutes. But not hot. It didn't say Paris Hilton hot. Now, this is kind of a bonus thing that I wish that you guys knew about dictionaries specifically, is that dictionary making is not a closed guild. We are quite embarrassingly grateful for any help. If you're interested in something, if you think something would be a great problem, right now we're thinking about, we get a lot of Google alerts because we have found phrases that journalists use to set off new words, like scientists call this X. So we search on the phrase scientists call it in Google News, and then they send us an alert. But what we're trying to do, and which we're completely hopeless at because we don't have the skills at all, is to kind of set up some kind of Bayesian filter where the ones that are really productive bubble up to the top, and we don't have to read. Grant Barrett, who's the project editor for the Historical Dictionary of American Slang, set up this program. I call it a program only in the very loosest sense of the word. And since he started working at Oxford about 2 years ago, he got 180,000 Google alerts. So he gets a lot every week, and we're trying to figure out which are productive, and we'll go and we'll look through them, and some of them drop off the list, and some of them get added. But we could do this better. We often ask people who are experts in a particular field, who wants to be our falconry expert? There aren't as many falconers as there used to be. So people with unusual hobbies who would be interested in looking at a particular set of words and get their name in the front matter that nobody reads. This is the kind of thing that we're doing. So really, we would be embarrassingly, desperately shake your hand so hard it falls off. That's our reaction to people who say, how could I help? What kind of cool things could I do? Did you ever think of X? Because, quite frankly, there's not untold wealth in lexicography, and it really only tends to attract people that are interested in the problem. And we're chronically underfunded and understaffed, but there's always room for another person who's interested in the problem. So, that's pretty much the top 10 things that, plus the bonus, that I wish people knew about dictionaries. And Pamela also said that I could maybe talk for a couple minutes about how lexicographers use Google. And I was thinking about that. I don't know if we use it that much differently than anybody else. I did notice that there were a lot of single-word Google searches downstairs. I can't remember the last time I put in, just a one-word search term. We do use Google Book Search a lot. I love Google Book Search. We use it a lot when we're looking for an example sentence, especially for a word. We're trying to find a real sentence that somebody who is not a lexicographer thought up. Because we do try and take all of our example sentences from the corpus, from real English. But oftentimes, those sentences have identifying details that we need to strip out. We have to generify the sentence. And so if we've generified a sentence to the point where it is made entirely of tapioca and conveys no meaning, sometimes we'll check that in Google Book Search. We look for words all the time there. Mostly, we use Google the way a junkie uses heroin. I really consider a day where I don't touch Google a wasted day. I'm kind of working on a day, an hour. I think the longest non-sleeping amount of time that I haven't touched Google was non-sleeping, non-trapped in a meeting room time, because Oxford's not quite as wired as this building. It's maybe like 45 to 50 minutes. It's really, but we have to be very careful, of course. We know that Google is a map. It's not the terrain. So what we find in Google, we always check someplace else in our corpus and other databases. And we're also very conscious of the fact that when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we try not to get into that mindset about it either. I was at this design conference, and I was talking to Jimmy Wales, founder of Wikipedia. I have no idea why I was at this conference. Everybody there was so much cooler than me. And I was talking to Jimmy Wales, and we were talking about what would you give up to keep Google? TiVo. I'd rather have Google than TiVo. Everybody I asked said yes, I would give up the internal combustion engine. We were kind of getting to the point where we were like, okay, your non-dominant hand. So really, the way we feel about Google is kind of like, when you were growing up and you had a friend who had like a really obnoxious little brother or sister that like followed you around everywhere and was like, look at me, I can do a handstand. That's kind of the way we feel about Google. We're like, wow, what are they going to do next? What's so cool? How can we warp this for dictionary use? We're always like, we know that you guys do a lot of stuff that you don't announce, so we're always trying like regular expression searches to see if they magically start working. Really, how lexicographers use Google is kind of, if you think about a non-word obsessed user and you just add in the word obsession. No, we search for MP3s. We do that kind of stuff too, but really what we're trying to find is using Google as a lens to focus our attention on the English language. And if Google went away, if I could no longer use any of the electronic, the technical, the computorial tools that I use now, if we had the big electromagnetic pulse and it killed all the computers, I would not be a lexicographer. I would give up dictionary work if those tools went away, because it would really be like traumatic brain injury. I would not know what to do. I would have to relearn everything from a completely different perspective. Although I have to say that the one high point, I think, of traumatic brain injury is that you read all the books you loved again for the first time. I mean, after you learn how to read again, obviously. But, if I couldn't have these tools, I would stop working on dictionaries. I think I would be a mailman in Portland, Oregon. That's pretty much the number 2 choice. But, so, really, I guess what I'm trying to convey is a really deep and abiding love. I want to thank all you guys for just doing what you do. I can't believe that there could be anything more fun other than my job. So Pamela wanted me to leave a little bit of time for questions. I'd be happy to entertain any of them, but I would only like to find questions that can't be Google smacked. So if you ask me something that you could have Googled, I mean, really. So, Well, how do I feel about Dictionarycom? I really don't think that there's such a thing as a bad dictionary. However, the underlying... I'm not going to say that Dictionary.com is bad, but there are 2 things I would like to point out to you. Dictionary.com is not about delivering dictionary data. Dictionary.com is about delivering advertising and about delivering eyeballs to advertising. Now, this is a good goal. The dictionary that they are using for the most part is out of copyright, which means it's 1918. Now, I said that the dictionary expiration date was not like that of milk, But considering there are time capsules that have been put in and opened since 1918, that's just something I wish people would keep in mind. So, but they're really nice guys. I like them personally.
How does a proper name get into the dictionary?
How does a proper name get into the dictionary? There are kind of like two paths to getting into the dictionary. American dictionaries put in a lot more proper names than other dictionaries around the world because Americans really expect a lot of encyclopedic information from their dictionary. So we're kind of, I once called the people who do the Q ratings, which measure how famous people are, and said, hey, wouldn't you like to give me all your data so I can use that to decide who goes in the dictionary? And they said, no, click. But what we really do is we kind of, when we're thinking about the biographical entries, we look at people of historical importance. If you were president, you're in. If you were vice president, you're in. If you were first lady, kinda. You had to be a fairly famous first lady. We put in pictures for pictures, we put in pictures that are free. So Secretaries General of the United Nations get a lot of pictures because they're not copyright. And also astronauts. Man, NASA, they're so good with the pictures. Because we have no money. And we want to spend all the money on words. The pictures are kind of an afterthought unless they're like things that can't be described in words, like various gears and so forth. We try and put in people that have achieved a certain level of notoriety as well, who might have, people might want to look them up to find out details of their lives. One of the most nerve-wracking moments I ever had was watching the OJ chase, and I had just finished work on a children's dictionary, and I was like, did we put OJ in? Please let it be no. Because children's dictionaries are a place where you don't really want notorious people. And I was in an airport, and it was going to be 22 hours before I could get back and check the book, and there was nobody that I could call. And it was just, my husband was like, just stop thinking about it for 30 seconds. Think about the poor people that lost their lives. Stop thinking about, was he in the dictionary? So we would like to do a fuller biographical dictionary, but we really haven't seen we haven't really seen the demand for a print product on that. And of course, Oxford has the American National Biography and the Dictionary of National Biography, which covers just about everybody important who ever died. They have to be dead, because those don't change. So, anybody else? Yes?
What point do you release a new edition of the dictionary? What goes into that decision?
Well, for the print version, we wait till we run out in the warehouse. So it's actually got a very real, what point do we release a new edition of the dictionary? I forgot to mention that the New Oxford American Dictionary and the Oxford American Writers' Thesaurus are the dictionaries in Apple OS X. So we have an arrangement with them where we're trying to send them updates on a regular basis. But there's like one guy in a bunker in Cupertino who decides when it gets updated. And I'm not quite sure when he makes that decision, or she. I don't know. My email goes through like 3 levels of email washing before it ever gets to anybody. But Apple is really fun to work with. So we're trying to update on a quarterly basis. And once we launch our online version, that will get updated on a quarterly basis. Not just because we like to set words free as soon as we can, but also because it gives us more chances to make people think about the dictionary. If you're talking about new words every 3 months, some of those will stick to people, and some of them will say, oh, maybe I should look something up. But there's no, other than waiting till we've run out in the warehouse, there's nothing quantitative. We don't like wait till we get 1,000 new words and then, hey, update time. So, yeah, do we have to stop?
No, I have a question.
Oh, okay.
Do you ever retire words from the dictionary? And if so, how do you make that decision?
Oh, yeah, we do retire words from the dictionary. I haven't retired very many yet because the New Oxford American Dictionary is only in its 2nd edition, which it's, in dictionary terms, it's a toddler. It's the newest American dictionary. It's even newer than Encarta, believe it or not. And so we, it's kind of like when you move into a new house. We haven't used up all the storage yet. We haven't had to rent the mini locker for the words that we can't fit in anymore. But really, it's the same decision about putting a word into the dictionary in reverse. Is it useful anymore? And some words sometimes get useful to smaller and smaller groups of people. And depending how vocal that constituency is, it may stick around a little bit past the point. There's a lot of inertia involved. Unfortunately, we like words so much that we want to hang on to as many as possible. So occasionally we'll make compromises in terms of type size and leading and kerning to squeeze more people in. It's like, oh yeah, you'll just sit on their lap, trying to fit more people into a car. And occasionally it gets just as dangerous. But so some words will die in the next edition. Well, will not really die. They'll just kind of be put in dictionary limbo. But if you kept your old one, you'll have it forever. So, yeah?
I recently looked up the word your, Y-O-U-R, because I was curious how you could describe what it means. And the definition included the word yourself.
Yes.
Which includes the word your. How do you decide which definitions can actually include the word they're defining? Because it's just sort of obvious.
This is the circular. I'm sorry, I was asked, how do you decide what definitions can include forms of the word being defined? So, I don't think you looked it up in my dictionary, because we don't have yourself in any of the definitions. We define it as a possessive adjective. Oh, you can put the whole dictionary in your Trio or your BlackBerry, the big one, the 2,000-page one. There's a disc in the back of the book to load it on. I would rather give up the phone part of my phone, the dictionary part of my phone. So, which means I should just get a Palm Pilot. But anyway, so we define it as a possessive adjective belonging to or associated with the person or people that the speaker is addressing. The example, what is your name? But the circular definition problem is very real. And I have to say that in function words and pronouns and prepositions, we are much more likely to be circular, just because these words have such narrow functional meanings that it's hard. There are not a lot of synonyms for on. What are you going to do? So, however, we really want to avoid the circular situation where you look up bog and it says a fen, and you look up fen and it says a bog. That we think is completely horrible. But we try not to go too far down this road philosophically, because if we start thinking about who's actually looking this up, then we get really depressed. Because we have two motives. We want to be a useful tool for people who are looking up the meanings of words, and we also want to be a semi-complete record of the English language, because eventually a lot of non-native speakers do use dictionaries, and they look up words like this. I do think that non-native speakers should be using learners' dictionaries at least for a while, until like 7 out of 10 of the words you look up aren't in the learner's dictionary. That's the point where you move to using a monolingual dictionary as well. But the whole idea of not defining a word with a word that's associated with it is sometimes a false stricture, in that as long as the definition of that secondary word is so common that we feel like people would really understand it better, we don't want to unnecessarily complicate the definition. And so this is like an Iron Chef constraint. They give you some weird ingredient, and they're like, okay, make ice cream out of this. If you constrain yourself too hard from not doing anything that's even related to the word in question, you sometimes make a definition that's unintelligible. So it's really a judgment call. I did not answer that at all. I'm sorry. So, you had a question?
You ever come across an example usage of a word in which you say, oh, the writer of this word just used this word incorrectly?
Yes. Because it's often very clear from the context, in that there are words which have natural environments. And sometimes you see a word which is a woman in a ball gown at a 7-Eleven. And you're like, that's completely out of context. And you look at it again and you're like, is there any reason for her to be here? Is there any kind of artistic merit? Is there any kind of story that you can weave around the woman in the ball gown? Is she buying cigarettes and beer? What's going on? And if there's no narrative, if there's no story, you could say this, and especially if the word is very similar to one that would have been right. If it was the guy in the ski mask and the gun instead of the woman in the ball gown, then you have a really good narrative for the 7-Eleven. But there's the problem with that if enough women in ball gowns start hanging out at the 7-Eleven, that makes it their context. So if enough people use words like, say, enormity, which means horrible, well, enormity, it started to show up at the 7-Eleven, and it now means very large as well. So it got confused with enormous. Most people who are very careful make this distinction, but most people aren't very careful. So things go from things that are not metaphorical extensions, things that aren't playful use of language, they go from being wrong all the time to being wrong some of the time to not being wrong. And this is a process that can take a long, long time. And everybody in the middle part of the process is uncomfortable and itchy. Because, I have to say, well, we're just going to wait and see. And then people who are really upset about it say, kill it now. But it's impossible. You can't kill it. If enough people get something wrong in this way, it becomes right. Or at least it becomes another layer on the word. So, but yeah, people make mistakes in language all the time. It's not perfect. Oh, there's one more guy. Sorry.
All right. So I'm curious how your company is trying, how it's decided how it's going to handle print versions versus electronic versions versus a website. If you have different target audiences or different expiration dates that you're trying to build into your publishing scheme.
That's a really good question. I'm being asked how Oxford is deciding between print and like portable electronic device versions and website versions. And really the answer is Oxford's a 500-year-old company. We decide things really slowly. And also we have a lot of different dictionary groups all around the world. There's Australia, there's South Africa, there's the UK group, there's Canada. So we have to coordinate with all the different units because there aren't really, especially for online versions, there are no national boundaries really anymore. People who go to the dictionaries, the Oxford Dictionaries UK website are often upset that they can't find an American dictionary there. It was the first URL they hit. Why shouldn't all of Oxford everywhere be the same? So I would like to have a lot of market differentiation. I would like to have a dictionary to fit every need and every possible user, because I know there are a lot of people out there for whom the idea of opening a print book that has 2,000 pages in it is unconscionable. They're like, why would I do that? Because it's on the internet, right? Well, when those people say it's on the internet, I want my answer to be yes. And when people say, I love using the dictionary, but I hate, I travel a lot, I can't carry that book around. I haul this thing out, and I say, you're going to have to carry one of these anyway. Why not, make it to be something you can look something up on and incidentally play Scrabble? Yeah, well, I won't show you Scrabble. Everybody knows what Scrabble looks like. But, so it's hard. What I'm doing now, though, is I'm designing the data primarily for electronic use, and the print will be a subset of the electronic use, because there are 3 constraints on making a dictionary: space, time, and money. So the other thing people say is, oh, if you put it online, you can include every word. I'm like, well, the space constraint went away, more or less, but I still have the same amount of time and money. And definitions, we don't just have an underground well full of definitions that we pump them up from and pour them into the book. People have to make those. So if I don't have any more time and money, the dictionary online is going to be the same size. So what I'm trying to do is add things that before we would pare away, like extra example sentences, semantic set coding, that wouldn't show up in the print book. This stuff will show up online. So right now I'm designing for online use and electronic version use, and print is going to be a subset. It's going to be more and more incidental. But we'll still keep making them because there's a real good feeling to the print book. When you look something up online, you have a target and objective. When you look something up in a book, you have a target, you have an objective. Looking something online is like a commando raid. You drop up out of the helicopter, you grab the target, and you get pulled back up. Looking up something in a print book is an overland invasion. You acquire a lot of targets between where you start and where you stop. And perhaps that's not, perhaps you're not on a war of acquisition. But if you have the extra time, you can get a lot more stuff. It's more serendipitous. So I hope that answered your question, because I went on an awful long time if it didn't. So thank you guys so much for being such a wonderful audience and for letting me be here. Thank you.